William Hayley was the author of one of the 18th century's finest, most impactful works of mansplaining. Written in verse, The Triumphs of Temper instructed young women on how to attract and keep a husband by keeping calm and staying positive. The book became a huge bestseller, championed by two of the most glamorous women of the time, the Duchess of Devonshire and Emma, the future Lady Hamilton. To give him his due, Hayley supported and promoted women writers, but he proved far less enlightened when it came to the women he loved, married, or had children with. This mini-doc focuses on Eliza Hayley, his first wife, an author and translator whose attitudes, opinions and expressions often feel remarkably modern. And it all starts with a short entry in Alex Kidson's lush catalogue raisonné of the artist George Romney's paintings.
It was undoubtedly a gift from one of our members. It looked like an extremely good head, an extremely good realisation of a person's face, but the surround didn't look quite the same. We had Simon Gillespie come to the hall.
I was called in to have a look at one of various paintings, and this was one of them, they said, was looking absolutely dreadful. And they were right. It looked like a sort of really bad Woolworths print that had been hanging in a man's club with people smoking pipes all over it.
I said, this doesn't look right to me. There's something not right about this picture. Is it a Romney? Is it not? But at that point, we were thinking it probably wasn't.
I would have thought it was Romney.
He then worked on taking off all the varnish, all the paint that was not, as they saw it, contemporary, and taking it back to whatever was original.
Throughout his memoirs, Hayley stresses Eliza's mental health problems. She's his poor Eliza, his pitiable Eliza. He was very possessive. She suffers from marvellous mental infelicities. And when he quotes her letters, which he does quite frequently, he does so when she's at her quietest, her most anodyne. But if you read the originals, a quite different personality reveals itself. She's angular, sparky, clever and opinionated. At times, yes, clearly troubled, but at others, she's just bored, uncomfortable with and clearly not good at small talk, and fed up with the polite, or sometimes not, conversation at local tea tables.
Here she is in a landscape by herself. All she can give is her expression. Rather lonely, tired. I was rather intrigued.
It is a remarkably moving, quite sad picture.
There's a kind of careworn expression around her eyes. Long-suffering, I think, is the word.
I lack any art history expertise, but even I know that when there's uncertainty about an artist, there's likely to be uncertainty about the subject of a picture too. Or, as curator Amina Wright put it to me, the obvious question, equivalent to, have you tried turning it off and on again, is how sure are you that it's actually Eliza? In the absence of any clear provenance, of course, we can't be sure, but it really looks like the other images of her.
I know comparing images is rather a unscientific way of going about trying to prove the likenesses of somebody, but I actually, totally believe in it. You can eliminate all kinds of weird identifications simply on the basis of comparing likenesses. It's much more likely to be Eliza than it's likely to be by Romney.
The chin and the nose as well. The Eliza portrait. I'm going to call it the Eliza portrait. Let's be positive.
But there's a problem. Amina Wright says that the sitter's hairstyle dates the portrait between 1787 and 1794, when Eliza, born in June 1750, would have been in her late 30s or early to mid-40s.
Lo and behold, we started cleaning her and we found something which was a bit of a surprise to us, which was this arm, almost caressing her. He's keeping his distance.
Between 1787 and 1789, the Hayleys' marriage was on the rocks and the couple rarely together. This was also, incidentally, when Eliza wrote her satirical essay, The Triumph of Acquaintance over Friendship.
Romney was incapable of painting a face like that by, the late 1780s, 1790s. He was too set in his ways. He'd evolved a way of making faces that was designed to flatter and to smooth out irregularities. And that face is just it's very characterful, but it is not flattering.
In spring of 1789, Hayley deposited Eliza in Derby, where she lived until around mid-1794, when, much against his wishes, she moved to London.
It's been reduced from what I think would have been bigger than a 3/4 size picture, which is normally the head and going down to the knees. In this case, you've got two people next door to each other, and he has been snipped off. This does happen. They probably had a major row as they left the studio, and that was the end of the commission. The scissors came out and he was chopped off.
What couple commissions a portrait when they're in the process of splitting up or have already done so? Is there any possibility that in the same way that some couples decide to have a baby to see if they can fix a failing relationship, William and Eliza chose to have a portrait instead? Hayley was very image conscious. Could the portrait have been a way of keeping up appearances?
Now, with the work that's been done on it, it's just the face and the rest is seen as incomplete.
Assuming this is Eliza, might there be another explanation? Another artist? There's something I haven't told you about Eliza and her relationship with her husband. When Eliza's mother died in 1783, Hayley wrote an elegy. Added to some shocking descriptions of how and why Eliza was conceived, he writes about her. She ne'er can feel what all her sex have felt, the glowing impulse of impassioned fire. Stranger to genial warmth, she ne'er can melt in the sweet trance of satisfied desire. As he explained, less poetically but with greater delicacy, to Sir Walter Scott, he had married a person to whom nature not only refused the privilege of producing a child, but even those natural desires which she has wisely and tenderly given to modesty herself for the preservation of the human race. As the poet Anna Seward, friend to both William and Eliza, wrote after the latter's death, fire in her affections, frost in her sensations, she shrank from the caresses even of the husband she adored. Hence, while she had a morbid degree of tenaciousness respecting his esteem and attention, she was incapable of personal jealousy, and would amuse herself with the idea of those circumstances with which she could so perfectly well dispense, being engrossed by another. For much of their marriage and after, the another was Mary Cockerell, mother to Hayley's adored son, Thomas Alphonso Hayley. Tom was born in October 1780. Mary, whose family were local tradespeople, was the Hayleys' housekeeper, maid, and sometimes William's secretary. Until his mid-teens, Tom called Eliza Mamma and his mother Mary. Letters between Eliza and William, and the fact that Mary accompanied Eliza when Hayley sent her to Derby, suggest the women were very close.
She's by a very good artist. She's got a lot of personality in there, which is it's a very difficult thing to get into a picture. But the great artists do, and he's died. Yeah.
If it wasn't by Romney, would you have any other suggestions?
Only one, and that's Right of Derby. From technical point of view, they paint very similarly, a similar sort of thickness of paint and the build-up of paint like this, and also they use this twill canvas. Not a lot of people were using that twill.
In October 1793, Hayley sent Tom for a long visit to his mamma. Wright was a good friend, and Hayley wrote to ask if Tom could spend the occasional hour drawing in his studio. Impressed with the boy's intelligence and interest, the artist ended up giving him regular tuition.
It really socks into her, almost her deformities. She's got this rather pinched mouth and like she's lost all her teeth. And that's all very much the work of a non-flattering type of portrait painter who paints what he sees.
There are artists that are flatterers, yes. And Romney, I suppose, is one of them. Right of Derby, what he sees, he'll paint.
His women are often, to my eye anyway, a little bit sort of red in the face and not always very friendly looking.
She looks like a tough cookie.
Sometimes a little bit sulky.
Lucy mentioned 3 pictures that particularly reminded her of the Eliza portrait. Richard Arkwright Jr. with his wife Mary and a child, the Reverend Jews Cook, his wife Hannah, and Daniel Parker Cook, and the portrait of Mary, Mrs. Francis Hurt, seated at a table. It's the last of these that bears the closest resemblance to the Eliza portrait.
It's a fascinating portrait. I've never seen the like in other 18th century portraiture. She is seated, beautiful silks, and they sort of show the play of light on their surfaces you would expect from Wright. Fantastic, quite improbable headgear that she's wearing. I mean, it's huge. She looks like she enjoys a brandy. She's pretty red in the face again, bit blotchy. She's an older woman, and so that there's a little bit of a few wrinkles around her eyes, some crow's feet. It's really beautifully done, but again, very honest. But she's taking snuff from a little tortoiseshell snuff box.
So I asked Lucy about the Eliza portrait. Is there a possibility that it could be, in your opinion, work by Wright?
I wasn't entirely convinced the first time I saw the picture of it. And I kept going back to it, as you do, and zooming in as much as I could. And the thing that really struck me are these highlights on her. It's on the top of her cheekbone, just running around her eye socket, on her temple, and then her top lip. And it's, to me, it looks like unblended Naples yellow, just next to that lovely pink blush on her cheek and on her forehead. And that was the first thing that sort of, I don't know, it switched the light bulb on in my mind. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. I've seen that before in Wright's work. And certainly that lovely warm, sort of slightly peachy glow. I thought, yeah, okay, that looks quite familiar to me. And again, there's a warmth in the sky, in the landscape behind it. Obviously, it's very sketchy, but you are getting I think you do feel a sense of warmth from it, and you can see what the artist is driving towards. Those were things, along with the twill canvas, and those things together sort of made me sort of sit up and question again, I think, what my previous assumption had been. And then, as you say, when you start to add in the potential date range that we could be looking at for the execution, and Eliza's time in Derby, I don't want to rule this out. This idea came to mind when I was in the shower, of all places, and I was thinking, well, here you've got young Thomas Alfonso learning his drawing with Wright, and I had a little idea that, is this something that Wright could have set up for him? I'll paint the face, as you do in a studio environment, and as indeed Wright himself would have experienced in training with Hudson. Get your apprentices and your pupils to potentially painting drapery or other details and finish up. But I don't know, how feasible that is. He was still very young, Thomas, wasn't he?
I mean, it's pretty childish drawing by hand.
There are, of course, plenty of caveats. There are no references to a sitting in Wright's account book.
It's frustrating because Wright's account book is kind of hit and miss. He was fastidious about recording some things and not others. And certainly where portraits of friends are concerned, or sort of paintings that were done as gifts for friends, they're not always recorded in a very helpful way.
I've also seen no reference to such a picture in Eliza or Tom's letters. But there are gaps in my reading, and we also can't be sure that all their letters survive. Additionally, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that if the project was dreamed up for Tom's benefit, the finished article was intended as a surprise gift for his father. It wouldn't have been the first time Wright had sent Hayley a painting out of the blue. Of course, none of this constitutes actual evidence for the portrait either being of Eliza or by Wright. Alex Kidson has suggested James Rawlinson as the artist, but no one I've spoken to thinks he was up to it.
Rawlinson is the obvious other candidate, but I don't believe it is him. The face is too good.
And of course, there's also the possibility that the painting has been correctly attributed, and that it is by George Romney.
I've never looked at this picture very, very carefully in the flesh. I freely admit that I was prejudiced against it from the outset. I went in with the background belief that I was going to see something that wasn't going to be by Romney. And what I did see didn't cause me to change my mind. I haven't really looked at this picture with an open mind. When you first contacted me about it, I looked at it carefully, and it was at that point that I sort of took cognizance that there were passages in it that did look like Romney, but the starting point was still the head, and I found that very, very difficult to believe could be by him. You're perfectly at liberty to, say Kidson's off his head, and his opinion is absolutely rubbish. I'm not going to kind of jump up in my defence.
So, Romney, Wright or Rawlinson? But wait, remember when Alex Kidson said...
It was at that point that I sort of took cognizance that there were passages in it that did look like Romney.
There's another possibility.
There is a sort of scenario emerging where more than one artist got involved. Hayley offers it to Romney, and Romney titivates it by kind of livening up the costume. That's where the brushstrokes occur that suggest Romney to me.
When Eliza died of a fever in November 1797, she'd been living in London for 3 years. When she moved, William was so angry he broke off their correspondence, pressed his friends to shun her, and initially even banned her from seeing Tom. As far as he was concerned, her attempts to assert independence amounted to a deeply personal insult. Meanwhile, Tom was also in London, apprenticed to the sculptor John Flaxman, another close friend of George Romney's. If it happened, I think it's most likely to have been Tom who took the portrait to Romney for titivation. We know they saw a lot of each other, while Romney found Eliza difficult and tried to avoid her. And given how cross Hayley was, it's very hard to imagine him making the effort. Unless, of course, he did it after Eliza died. After all, he had her body brought back to be buried at Eartham, wrote the funeral sermon, and commissioned 3 mourning rings, one for himself, one for Tom, and one for Tom's mother, Mary. As Lucy Bamford says of the portrait,
I think it deserves further investigation.
The portrait deserves further investigation, and Eliza's story deserves telling. With huge thanks to Lucy Bamford and Derby Museums and Art Gallery, Dr. David Bartle and the Worshipful Company of Haberdashers, Simon Gillespie, Alex Kidson, Dora Mariani for visual design, and Amina Wright, all of whom have generously given their time to help me make this. I'm Lisa G. Thank you so much for watching, and do get in touch to let me know if you've enjoyed the video or have any questions.